It's quite a tough skill to master, who actually cares about you and doesn't just see you as a paycheck.
Effectively, you were page 3, just overnight, everyone knew your face.
When the pictures went up, within that week, I became famous overnight.
Do you look back and see it differently from how it felt at the time?
I'd been cast into the bimbo seat, but I didn't know it. I felt really quite vulnerable. I'm trying to fight the laws of nature because what a waste.
As part of that show, you'd go and flag for free. Did you really, though?
We actually got to the point where I remember the producers saying, we need somebody to say no.
I have a question that I have been wanting to know the answer to for about a decade. Melinda Messenger, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We were in the middle of a conversation before we started rolling, and I thought it'd be worth talking about it. We were talking about Hugh Grant having his own... or making himself his own agent or his own assistant.
Faking an agent, yeah.
To answer emails, which is a nice idea in theory, but I think you end up having to do the admin yourself.
It's quite clever in a way, because if you haven't yet got the sort of finances, resources, gigs to have an agent, then you are going to have to do your own admin anyway. You know, you'd have to do everything, don't you? You're literally...
Yeah. The thing that I found with doing a lot of stuff in-house, sort of doing it myself, is you need someone sometimes to have the difficult conversations. You know, if someone's taking the mick and stuff like that, and you never want to be the bad guy. And actually, you shouldn't ever be the bad guy. You should also sort of insulate yourself from, you know, my job is to go and do the show or whatever it may be. And if you have to kick off about something, it's better for it to not be from you anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I mean, I'm not very good at that. I'm very much sort of a people pleaser, trying to flutter my eyelashes and make sure everyone's happy. But it has stung me in the past, you know, where I end up being the brunt. And if someone takes offence to something that's, you know, been said or a problem that hasn't been quite resolved as smoothly as it should have been. Not that it happens very often, but it does happen. You know, if you do a couple of 100 shows a year, you can't then come back at some point in the future because you are the buck is stopping with you, rather than you can go, oh, sorry about my former this, that, or the other. I'd love to come back, and you know, and it is interesting. It's an interesting point there.
Yeah, I guess you're talking about preserving relationships, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know, and in an industry where things can get quite dramatic quite quickly. You know, if there's a problem and it needs resolving, and so to have somebody handle that for you, it does make sense. It's a buffer. Otherwise you're kind of in the realm of, and in an ideal world, we'd do this, wouldn't we? Where you can just be totally transparent and say what you need, say what's not right, and work it through. You know, that would be like the ideal scenario. And then you don't have to split into good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
But the reality of the fact is, you know, that's not really the world that we're in, or the industry, or how the industry always works. So to have somebody that can do the messy bits so you can just get on and do your part makes sense.
And particularly when you're sort of starting, you have a bit of a transition where it doesn't, you know, the thing that I've struggled with sometimes is a lot of my career is based around goodwill with people and purposely sort of playing that. I read a book one time that was called Positioning or something like that. And it was talking about Pepsi and Coca-Cola and Burger King and McDonald's, and that they work because Burger King knows it's number 2 and isn't trying to be number 1. And if they wanted to be number 1, they would fail because of all those other reasons. So when you first start, you get a lot of sort of legs, I suppose, from the grassrootsness and building those relationships. But then before you're sort of successful enough or have the infrastructure to have a team of people around you, you almost have to play both sides of that fence. And it's that transition that's quite tricky. And I found this with Edinburgh and with other places is sometimes, you know, if your relationship is built entirely on goodwill, you're the last person to get paid for stuff or whatever it may be. Whereas if you've got a big infrastructure behind you, of a team of people who have got other people on the roster, then they've got a bit more leverage, which is interesting. That
it's a real challenge. I completely get what you're saying, because to work in the industry, it is all about relationships, and you do need the goodwill, and that really matters. But it does put you in a challenging position if you haven't got the team around you, because it can be then really hard to have the challenging conversations like, when am I going to get paid, or why haven't I been paid, or this needs to be different.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because and you'll probably have sort of memories of this from when you first broke through and went from no one knowing your name to everyone knowing your name over, a short period of time. And it's the thing that I've struggled with a lot over the last probably 18 months or so, as everything has just gone, is when it's small, or when you're, as someone the other day called it Civvy Street, is, but when you're sort of just someone in the crowd and you're trying to break through or whatever it may be, and it's early days, you have a better grasp on everything, I think, because I remember Jimmy Carr talking about what he does for a living, going, I'm the only person in the room facing the wrong way, and it does feel like that sometimes, because the more eyes there are on you, there's conversations that are having about you that you have no eyes on and have no idea what the context of it is. And so you don't know what the right thing to do is in any situation. And with something like that, or, if there's a job that you would like to do, or, with theatres or TV work, or whatever those things may be, you don't know the right way to navigate it, and sometimes you need people there to bounce those things off,
Yeah, absolutely. And you need trusted people as well, because I think another one of the sort of challenges for people who are kind of trying to get going or trying to get established is that often, they're in quite a vulnerable situation and quite a vulnerable position. And unfortunately, there will be people that kind of exploit that. And so it's quite a tough skill to master, actually, who's a good alliance, who actually cares about you and doesn't just see you as a paycheck, and doesn't just want to completely exploit you, but keeping in mind that it's also a business and an industry, and that has to come into play as well. So I think it's a bit of a minefield. And if you've got people, even if it's just a good friend, that's kind of got their head screwed on, that you can sound things off to. Otherwise, it's really bizarre. People can't relate, like you're saying with the Jimmy Carr situation. It's hard for people to relate to what those challenges are like.
And I think Jimmy's good at that, actually. I mean, I had someone working on my show, Amanda Baker, her name is, who did a lot of work with the directing, but directs Jimmy's show. And Jimmy's work ethic is really interesting, because he works 300 days a year. And I was actually looking at his American tour dates, and obviously American tour dates, you're flying rather than driving between places, but it's every day. But he's got a really interesting setup where he goes and does the show, and he has someone else go in that he trusts that sets the show up. So he basically walks on stage and walks off stage, and then the driver's there. But then she, as in Amanda, or the other people he works with, will be in the car sometimes. And so they've got a couple of hours to work through stuff, and you have a process. I think finding the process is interesting. When you were talking though, it sort of it struck a chord. I was just wondering, how much you were aware of the business of show business when you first started, as in like the emphasis on the business rather than the show.
I didn't know about the show or the business. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think mine is a really sort of peculiar set of circumstances, how I became famous, because it's so different. So in a sense, there's somebody like yourself or others, you've got a talent and a skill and a craft, and that's what you've kind of been developing and building, and that essentially is then what sort of breaks through and takes you through. So you've already got that kind of worked out. I was a customer services manager, and I managed a department of 50 people. That's all I knew about business, sorting out customer problems. And I literally became famous overnight. And so I was kind of,
I suppose, in a time when you could as well. In
a time when you could. I mean, it's still a bizarre thing. I think it's about 27 years ago now. And still to this day, it's bizarre. But that's what happened. So I knew nothing about the industry, the business, how it worked. I didn't even know why I was there or what I was doing, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I just thought this is all, I thought I'd just been plopped into the middle of a very strange adventure. And I thought, well, I'll go along and see what happens.
Raises loads of questions for me because, fame feels like something that's transient. And anyone that I know that's successful in show business and has been for a long time always feels like it's transient. My Uncle Paul used to talk about it. He said, I'm very aware that fame is a fleeting thing and it will come and it will go. And it never did for him, actually. But I think it didn't because he was aware of that and then kept doing the grassroots nuts and bolts of what he wanted to do and loving the audience. And when I was sort of looking at you and your career, and I was thinking about not just you, but the other people I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks about what makes you successful. And I remember from like Fort Bayard days, Friday night, sort of our no school tomorrow sort of program. And the thing that struck me when I was looking at your career and also other people that have broken through in a similar way is there's like a warmth and a likability that comes through, that gives it the cut through. I mean, do you know what the secret to that was for you? Do you know what, were you aware of that, or was it something that was just you were yourself and it shone through?
I really had no clue. I had no clue, genuinely, like why I was, why I was famous. So, it started off with the modelling really quickly, and I remember just looking at the pictures and thinking, I just look like everybody else. I didn't get that. I didn't understand. I got offered TV work pretty quickly, and then, did a chat show and all sorts of TV shows and Fort Bayard. But I had no idea why. I had no idea what I was doing. What I do remember, so when I got offered a chat show, it was actually in a live theatre. I'd never done any telly, hadn't trained. It wasn't actually something I even wanted to do.
Yeah.
And in the very early days, I got asked if I would host a chat show. So it was Jack Doherty, I don't know if you remember him, comedian. And he had a chat show on Channel 5, and he was leaving. And they asked me if I would take over. And I thought, what a crazy thing to do. Why would they ask me? I'd never presented television. No experience, hadn't been to drama school. I didn't have any relevant experience or training in any possible way. But I think perhaps maybe with me and maybe other people, what my mentality was I just sort of thought, what was I, 27 years old? I just sort of thought, oh, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
It can't be that bad. The worst that can happen is I'll just totally humiliate myself in front of everyone. But to be fair, I'd humiliated myself so often that I was okay with. I thought, so that's all right. If I was more concerned if I didn't have a go, I would feel really kind of gutted, like I didn't try.
You kind of reminded me of what we were touching on. I will just say this as well, just for the sake of the camera, is there's some building work outside, it turns out. So if there's any residual noise, that's where it's coming from. But we're talking, when you're in your 20s, the stakes are lower, I think. And, I'm not talking about needing a team around you and those sorts of things. I feel the pressure because I feel like the stakes are higher and I care about it, and it's something that I want to do and I want to be successful at. And so when you have to have difficult conversations, you overthink them, I think. And so sometimes having a team around you helps with that. But when when you haven't done anything and you're not really sort of haven't got your slippers off in the career that you're building, you have the sort of
you've got the freedom of not being aware. So you're kind of like describing, and also no attachment. I had no attachment, so you've invested a lot. You're building something that's amazing. It
but emotionally
matters.
Investing as well as
hugely that all creatives do, don't they? It's an expression of of who you are and your soul and your nature, you know, and that's massively important. And so you're investing everything, your energy, your time, your thought, your money, you know, your creativity. Whereas I guess what happened with me is I felt like I'd just sort of been flicked into this sort of spotlight. And then I was like, what am I doing here? Oh, wow.
Do you retrospectively look back at it and have a different feeling about it? Because effectively you were page 3 and just overnight everyone knew your face and other parts, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't even, well, actually it started the other way around.
Yeah.
I was overnight. So how it happened is really weird. As I say, I was a customer services manager. There was a local agency in the town Swindon where I'm from and lived, and they didn't have any kind of models really, because it was just sort of a bit of a new setup. They had a first client that came in, and I knew the woman that had set it up. She knew me because Swindon's a small place and we'd all go out to the same pubs and clubs at night. And she called me up one day and said, I've got our first ever gig, but I haven't got any models. You know, can you just pretend to be a model for me? And I was like laughing and like, oh, you know, God, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel here if you've got to ask me. And she's like, no, please, I need numbers. And I was like, all right, I did it as a favour for her. I said, all right, I'll come in and pretend to be the model. And little did I know, they offered me the job. And of course, you know, this is 1997 and I'm 27 years old. And
did you have any sort of showbiz in your line of sight at all?
No, none whatsoever. I couldn't be. I mean, this is how non-showbizy I am. I remember there was a local pantomime that my dad was involved in, and he wanted me to be in the chorus.
Yeah.
You know, when I was, I don't know, I probably would have been about like 10 or something like that. And I was traumatized at the thought of it. I was like, I can't get on stage. And he was like, you can wear a complete he said, you can go in a it was like a bear costume or something. No one will even see you. And I was so traumatized at the thought, that's how the level. Yeah. I mean, I know people find it hard to believe with me because of, you know, what people see and what I've done. But my actual real nature is I'm really introverted. And so for me, it's like it takes a lot to sort of then put myself out there. And no, I didn't have any desires. I did have a premonition.
Yeah.
Which actually terrified me because I was like, why would that happen to me?
Yeah.
But it did, and it actually came true.
What was going to happen?
I had a premonition that I was. It was one afternoon, and I was just relaxing in the bath, and you know, as I know now, all these years on, you know, when you're in those relaxed states, actually, is when you're quite open.
Yeah.
And I suddenly had it was a vision. I just saw in front of me all of these newspapers, and they were kind of rotating like this, one after another, and I was on the front of it, and I was like, why am I seeing that? That is and this was before the call from, you know, the local Swindon agency asking me to pretend to be a model for them. But within a week of all that happening, they'd asked me to do the job. They said, here's 200 quid. I was like, that's a lot of money. And, you know, and who's going to ever know? It won't matter. I'll do it. And literally when the pictures went up within that week, I became famous overnight. And so, you know, it was really, really weird to get my head around. So I had no preparation or planning, no desire. My only desire was for freedom. So that's how I'm inclined. I wanted adventure and freedom.
Yeah.
And I wanted to travel. And, you know, I was very, very lucky because then this happening to me kind of gave me those elements.
Yeah. I'm just going to pause this conversation very briefly to talk about the tour show. You'll probably know that I'm a magician normally. I'm a magician by trade. I love these conversations because I love hearing about people's lives and hearing about their routes to success and the struggles they have and how they've overcome them. But my day today is I tour a theatre show called The Dreamer. It's a magic show and I'd love to see you there. I do theatres all over the country, to be honest, everywhere from Scotland down to Southampton and everywhere in between. So if you fancy having a look and coming and seeing the magic show, the show is called The Dreamer Live and the website is thedreamerlive.com, or alternatively, click on the link below. It's interesting because what it strikes me is sometimes the route to success is just saying that that's what you're doing now. To yourself more than outwardly. I mean, I had a friend of mine her name's Sam. She's a hand model. And by me doing my best hand model, where she'll do Hot Point ads or whatever. Where
it's quite a hard job, isn't it, to make your hands look
She's
nice.
very good at it.
Mine always look like claws. It's not attractive.
I said to her, how did you get into it? She goes, well, I just started telling people I was one and then the work started coming in. And I think that's quite a nice metaphor, really, because it's almost like, and I think that's true with a lot of things, where you go, I've decided now that this is the person I am, and therefore you behave as such, and therefore the opportunities. And also, it's almost like, have you ever heard that thing? I mean, I'm sure you've heard the thing about the red car idea, where if you
think about it, you see one everywhere.
If I asked you how many you saw, you wouldn't know. Whereas if you were looking for them, if you got to the end of the journey, you'd be able to tell me. And
we are straying into the territory which I love most, which is all the esoterics, and you're talking about manifestation and the power of the mind, basically.
Yeah.
If you certain things have to be kind of lined up inside for that to happen. So you couldn't just think, oh, I want to be a hand model, and then bang, you're a hand model. Internally, you've got to line up with that. So there had to be a belief in her that she was, and it was possible, and there was no resistance. And I think it's the resistance. I had no resistance or attachment to any outcome. I was just like, here's what the opportunity I've been presented with. Shall I say yes? Shall I say no? It was like, are you going to take the ticket to ride or are you not? Or if you look at...
The resistance is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because lots of things with opportunity, I think there's two parts of it, as far as I see it anyway, is people can do what they can see.
What you can imagine.
Yeah. And so maybe with her, she's probably met someone or had conversations with people where she knows that's a thing that can happen. But also there's the anxiety of things that puts roadblocks in your way. There's a famous story about someone who was homeschooled and their mum said that you were just too smart for the school. And then when
exactly who you're talking about.
And then when their mum died,
I think that's Einstein.
Is it Einstein? And it was said something like, his mum said that they've taken you out of school because you're too smart for the other people. And then so he spent his life believing he was. And then it was only after his mum died he found the original school report that said the opposite.
Yeah, I believe that was Einstein.
Yeah.
And, and whether it's true or not, if it's a parable, it's actually, it stands valid because it's absolutely true. It's about... how we limit ourselves. You're talking about people can be what they can see, but really that's imagination. Whatever we can imagine, we can bring to fruition, because that is that's the first realm in which anything is created. Without that, nothing can come to pass. If you couldn't conceive of an idea or imagine something, then you can't bring that into physical reality and have it in your show or in your life. Yeah. So that's the first realm.
Something that brought me a lot of power and peace, I suppose, and in equal parts, is I remember reading something at one point that said, we don't have any idea about anything really. Like you've got your two set of eyes, and it's the same thing we're talking about Jimmy Carr and Facing the Other Way. Is his only experience of his show is when he walks on stage, sees the audience, and then sees the dressing room, and then leaves. You don't see people getting the babysitters or in the bar or the conversations beforehand or what it's like. Like you don't have any of that sort of. You're not watching the show from a bird's eye view. You're watching it from your 2-eye perspective. And so you don't have any idea really about anything other than your perspective. So thinking you can't do something is as correct as thinking that you can do something. But if you think you can do it, then the odds of it happening are infinitely higher. So you may as well just believe what you would like to believe and go with it sort of full force. And and I think that's quite a nice way to get things done, because also you overcome the challenges if you think you can do it. Whereas if it is almost like a confirmation bias of whatever it may be, and you go, no, I can't, this isn't going to happen. At the first challenge, you go, see, I was right, rather than going, this is something to overcome.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the having faith, really, is what you're talking about, isn't it? Having faith in yourself. I mean, it doesn't mean that, there might not be parts of you that doubt it or are scared or don't think you can, but there's the having the faith. You're also talking about having courage. You have to have a certain amount of courage in order to go, I'm going to try, no matter what, I'm going to try. So you also have to have faith or trust that the outcome will happen.
Yeah. But also blind faith, is kind of, if you're talking about, not being overly, the stakes aren't that high. If you have a vision of where you want to be and you can detach yourself from it emotionally sometimes, then sometimes you can just go all in and not worry either way.
And I think that is about, the cliche of focus on the journey and not the destination. So if you've got yourself set on the destination, okay, you do need to know what your destination is, but if you're set there, and your kind of happiness is dependent on reaching it, then you're going to really struggle, aren't you? Whereas if you are focused on, well, I'm just doing this today and I'm just doing this today, and you do that with, as much kind of love or passion or as excitement that you can muster for it, then your outcomes are going to significantly change. And no matter what, you will be getting something from it. Yeah. And you're detached. The minute something has to be a certain way, if life has got another plan for you, as often it does, and it's sort of trying to steer, because I'm an absolute believer that if something's not happening, if the door is closed, if people keep saying no, to try not to let that get to you or get you down. I can totally get why it would, but try not to take that as a rejection. It's that thing. It's not rejection. It's it's redirection. There's another path for you. And
it's also more tools you have more touch points in your brain to problem solve. When you know what's possible and what isn't possible. I think there's something that I struggle with a lot when I'm overwhelmed by stuff, and because you're worried about the negative outcome, and it paralyzes you. Whereas if the worst thing that happens is you get to the negative outcome, and then you have more data to play on for what your next decision is.
If you look at everything, no matter what, is you've got something to learn, then you're always going in the right direction, aren't you?
Something that was interesting to me is when you first broke through, you hadn't had a history in show business. You were still in your 20s, and it was very much, a modelling a career on page 3 of something that doesn't exist anymore. So I have 2 questions for it, which I'll keep separate because they're 2 contrasting questions, I suppose. But what's your feeling about that now? What's the feeling about page 3 as an idea? And do you look back and see it differently from how it felt at the time?
So what is my feeling on page 3 now? I mean, I suppose I have to give you the context, and so from my standpoint, again, I'm not looking to be a model, or, I wasn't looking for kind of success in that way or anything. It was literally, would you like to do this? Could you do this for us? And, and because of my nature, I was like, oh, why not? Okay. And so I didn't have any kind of view on it, really. I just thought, why not? And I guess, so whilst I was doing it, I was just like, well, I can't see myself doing this for very long, because I got bored really, really quickly. And I thought, so I think I only ended up doing literally like a handful of photo shoots, possibly only 3 with Sun. It wasn't many at all. And then kind of started being offered TV work and went in that direction. So at the time, my view on it was, well, this is an opportunity. I'll just see what it's like. I don't have to do it if I don't like it. If I do like it, I'll carry on. And that was it. I didn't have any more attached to it. how I see it now is it's very different, you know, and it's one of the, when people are talking about wanting to become famous or to have success, and you know, and have asked me, would I recommend that route in? I'd say absolutely not. You know, if you know what you want to do, you know, for example, it might be a TV presenter or whatever, don't take that route, because I'd say it's slowly changing. But at that time, 27 years ago, you know, we're talking pre-internet, there's no social media, there's no internet. We're kind of conditioned by what we read in newspapers and magazines and see on television, here on radio. That's it. That's where we sort of form opinions and, you know, form that kind of collective understanding. And at that time, it was very much people belong in one box. So if you're this, you stay in that box. You know, they don't like to see you in any other way. It was like the capacity wasn't there to understand that human beings are multi-dimensional beings with so capable of so much, you know, rather than just you are this. So that's how I think things have changed. With social media now, we've got the capacity to expand our own minds and go, of course, everybody is capable of a lot of different things. You don't have to just do your stage show. You can also be a podcaster. You might want to create products. You can do whatever you like if you've got the imagination, will, desire, and drive to do it, and the love to do it. You know, and so I think I don't know if I've answered your question.
I'll tell you why I'm asking, and you have answered it completely, but the reason I was asking is, and you know, these two separate things I'm about to say will join together. But I know my auntie struggled with it until she probably did Strictly, where in most people's minds, certainly TV people's minds, I think she was someone that gets put in and out of boxes, and that was
typecast.
And very much sort of like the psychic rather than anyone with a brain. And you know, Debbie's. I speak to Debbie about strategy of stuff all the time, and then Strictly kind of opened that for her, I think. And so I really recognise what you're saying, and which leads me on to Mrs. Merton, which is why I was asking the question, because I watched the Mrs. Merton interview that you did when you were probably 27, I would assume. 27, and it's all very much. And
I was the butt of the joke.
Yeah, I don't even know if you're necessarily the butt of the joke, but it was very much objectifying. It was that, and as someone who's an introvert naturally, becoming, it was just, and I don't want to overplay it, but it was very much sort of like an objective, over-sexualized conversation.
Completely, and funnily, it's so weird you should mention that, because I, you know, had never ever watched anything I'd ever done on television, you know, and bearing in mind I'd done a lot, you know, interviews, TV shows, whatever, but I would never watch anything. And then it was only very recently, like in the past few years, that my kids, you know, because my kids were like, Mum, why do people ask you for your auto? You know, they wanted to see something, and I went, oh, let's just have a look, because I didn't have anything either. I didn't keep it. And I think I found that interview on YouTube, and I sat with them and we watched it. And I thought, you know, I was just going to laugh and reminisce and kind of remember that occasion. And actually, to be really, really truthful, what I ended up feeling was really, really sad. Because what I connected with was my 27-year-old self, who kind of had no idea like what was going on, what had happened to me, but felt truthfully, you know, and I wouldn't have told anybody back then, but I can now because it's so long ago, and, you know, and I've obviously changed and grown up a lot, but I actually felt really quite vulnerable in that position, because I did feel like I was, you know, I did feel sort of the butt of everybody's joke. And I think even in the audience, and I remember there was one lady, and she, you know, looked like, she's a lady probably the same age as me now, in her 50s. And she was the only one that was sort of kind of kind, you know, and she wouldn't join in on the bandwagon of like you know, the subtle undercurrent of a dig. And that's not to say, because Caroline Hearn was wonderful to me after that, and actually, you know, she was wanted to work with me and was writing stuff, and you know, and obviously, you know, that wasn't able to happen, but. So it wasn't out of cruelty. It was that's just how we are as a society. That's how, you know, that was my role. You know, in like Shooting Stars, getting placed in the, you know, or I did, what was it? Oh gosh, this is really going back. I can't even think of it now. It was Terry Wogan used to host it with the long wand, and you'd have the panel. Blankety blank. So there was always the bimbo seat, you know, and that, I mean, now we're, you know, thankfully we've like developed a little bit more, but that was my position that I'd been placed in. So I'd been cast into the bimbo seat, but I didn't know it. Or didn't know how to handle it,
you must have come off, because I watched it, and, you know, I was, to finish my sentence, you must have come off and felt not at peace because of it. I did. No, I felt. And as someone watching it who, you know, I'm not much older than you were then, but enough, you feel protective because you feel like they are all in a position of power. I can't remember who the other guest was, and I won't name it. Oh yeah, go on.
He was very overtly sexual, to the point where I was deeply uncomfortable, and I think I kept looking at Caroline for help. I mean, I wouldn't be like that now. I'd stand up for myself, but back then, I didn't know what to do, and I just thought the only thing I could do, which was my defence at the time, was just to sort of laugh at myself.
You handled it really well.
Loudest, yeah.
But do you look back at it and feel almost protective over your younger self, I suppose?
I feel really protective over my younger self. That's exactly how I felt when I watched it. I was like, oh my God, I could see my naivety. You know, I could see just how naive I was. But, you know, how would I have ever been prepared for something like that? It was so out of the blue and unexpected. And I did feel really protective of that part of me. And I thought, you know, if I could go back, I'd probably wouldn't let her do it. Yeah. or I'd have a few kind of better answers prepared. Yeah. But, you know, I also don't regret it. And I think that's really important to say as well. I absolutely don't regret it, because it was a steep learning curve for me, you know, in that kind of intensity, in the sort of public eye. I was also behind the scenes that people didn't know about, having huge kind of family issues around it as well. Really, really hugely kind of destructive stuff going on. And so it was all kind of, as I would put it now, a kind of alchemical cooking pot that kind of really forced and helped me to grow, learn, develop, and get into therapy.
Yeah, and I suppose it's, you know, I've mentioned this before on here, but there's a thing about, you know, I get a lot of noise around, particularly when I'm doing shows in Edinburgh or places like that, where there's a lot of eyes and a lot of competing eyes. You get a lot of noise. So I spent a long time trying to rationalize that and trying to find peace with it, because I would just rather just, you know, I feel like with anything, more of something is better. Like with magic, for example, I don't have any trials or tribulations about there being more magicians or more magic shows. I feel like people will come and see my show because they've seen Penn and Teller's show and they like it, and vice versa. And, you know, I read a thing that said, if Michael Jordan was the only basketball player, no one would care. You know, he wouldn't be a superstar. But because there's hundreds of thousands of basketball players, it allows people like Michael Jordan to excel. And so I've never sort of particularly had that sort of resentment or professional jealousy to anyone, because I kind of feel like there being more of something means there's more of an audience for it. But that feeling's not mutual, put it that way. And so I spent a long time trying to find peace with that people don't share that mindset. And the thing that I found, which was sort of gave me the most peace about it was that the more you stand in a spotlight, the bigger shadow you cast. So there's, the more you stand up tall, then the bigger the shadow is behind you. And so you're going to get those detractors and those that negativity because you're doing something that's in a spotlight in the sort of proverbial sense. And I suppose that's the sort of other side of it, is it's the flip side of the coin of what was a successful time in your life, in that it was, with the success comes the alternative, and it isn't necessarily that, but it's whether it be the personal relationships that suffer, and when you're on the road 100 nights here or whatever it may be, that you miss out on stuff, and after a couple of times people stop asking, or mentally, or having balance in your life, or something more profound like that, is I guess it comes as the other side of success.
It does. Everything comes with two sides, doesn't it? And it's kind of like really, it's a fantasy to think that it doesn't, that everything is all just positive or just negative. They're the two sides of, it's like a universal law. If you've got an up, you've got a down. It's, if something's good, there'll be something bad. Yeah, it's that is just inherent laws of nature. And so, likewise with absolutely anything. But, in anybody's job, it doesn't matter what anyone's doing. You might have a job that you love, but there will be elements that you don't love, or there'll be elements that causes stress and challenge. And I guess ultimately what we do is we weigh up, the phrase, is the juice worth the squeeze? It is, do I love it enough? Do I get enough goodness from it? And does it fulfill me enough that all of these other challenges, if you put it that way, because it makes them, more possible to deal with, that it makes them worth it, and if it's not, then obviously there's a reevaluation that's needed. But there isn't, that's not particular, I think, to fame or this industry. That's universal. That's everyone's life. But I think what you're saying is, we're talking the sort of polarity. So when there is something that's extreme, so if it's extreme kind of benefits, positivity and all those good things, the counter side is also then extreme. So
and you don't
take
ever
both
price
together.
it in, I don't think.
Well, I don't think you can necessarily know, what's coming, and that's where that sort of finding the neutral point in the middle, becomes really important.
Yeah. And I suppose doing something you want to do with downsides that you can handle or find peace with or cope with, or, don't mind that much, I guess the other question that it draws to me is what the impact is of when you have a career, and I'm talking exclusively about the sort of showbiz career, but if you have a career that has been based on an aesthetic, as you start to feel yourself maturing and growing and getting older. Yeah, and getting older.
Wrinklier and grayer.
Well, just, I don't, people say this about, just age in general. I don't ever feel anything negative about it. And I realise that's a relatively peculiar thing to say, but hitting 30 is something that a lot of people have worries over. And I have my thoughts with it have always been, firstly, you can't touch either side. You can't touch older, you can't touch younger, so you kind of are where you are. And the other thing with it is I'm the most capable I've ever been, ever, so I can do more now than I could have done when I was 21 years old. But I guess the question I want to ask with it is, how does that affect you, knowing that, when a lot of your career has been built on an aesthetic, as it starts to change, whether or not that affects you?
Well, I think...
No, by the way, not that it has changed, because you look the same now as you did when you were 27.
Trust me, I really do not. I've got many, many wrinkles and grey and white hair, and I'm really happy about that, actually, because it means I'm still alive and I've lived for 53 years, and thank God, and hopefully I live longer and get older and greyer and more
Would be
wrinklier.
a great end to the podcast, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Loads of people would watch it.
So I guess, I totally get what you're saying. And I guess in my situation, because the modelling was so short-lived and I sort of went into the world of television presenting, how I looked obviously still had a part to play in it for sure. But how I look to me doesn't matter to me. And I think that's the difference. So whilst I recognised it was important to other people, and other people, either said that, that matters or it doesn't matter, it didn't matter to me because I always thought, well, I never really thought, I just thought I'm kind of pretty much average, and know more about that's the least important thing about me, or the least interesting thing about me. Yeah. So it didn't concern me. And then, TV, I just, that kind of continued. Now, of course, I'm sort of in the world of psychotherapy and dream research, and how I look bears no relevance. But I do remember being that kind of, 27-year-old, and I think I was doing a pantomime somewhere, and it was with a very, very beautiful Hollywood, she was an A-list actress, and she was probably the age I am now. And I remember looking at her thinking, what a beautiful woman she was, but what a very talented woman, very talented actress. She'd been in like big films, big kind of like A-list films. But I also saw the struggle that she had, based on how she looked, and still feeling that she had to play that role. And I made a decision at that age that I said, I need to learn from this, that, I cannot ever be in that situation where I'm trying to fight the laws of nature, because what a waste. What a waste to try and do that. And, and what a waste of an opportunity, because getting older, as you pointed out, can provide us with so much more. I mean, I genuinely would never want to go back to being in my 20s or 30s.
Yeah, I feel the older I get, I feel more liberated, because you understand things better, largely. You understand the world, but also you understand yourself better and how your life works and how it's set up, I suppose. But I don't have that sense of anxiety that maybe I can't do something that I had when I was 21 or 25. I feel much more sort of like I if I wanted to do something, I can find a way of doing it probably, or everything's meant to happen for a reason, or any of those sorts of things. And so I think you lose a certain degree of anxiety that come by getting wiser as you get older, and understanding things more and learning. And it's kind of what we were talking about before of sort of stuff needing time to ferment, before we were start recording, about stuff needing time to ferment in your head. And that happens over years. And so when you're, every 5 years that goes by, you have a much better understanding of you and the world around you, I think, than you did, the decade before or whatever, I think.
Yeah, ideally, because that's the point, isn't it? The point is that we forever evolve. What we actually don't want to do, ironically, which is what was, sometimes the unconscious message is that you should stay trapped in time, or you should stay exactly the same. That actually goes against everything we're designed to do. We're designed to evolve, and evolving means, growing older, learning, developing. You'll be capable of way more as you gain knowledge, wisdom, experience. You'll be capable of way more. But if we hold ourselves to sort of seeking, I guess, acceptance or validation, then we are sort of trapping ourselves in time too.
Yeah, I remember watching an interview or a mastermind thing with Tony Robbins, who's probably nearly 70, I'd assume, 65 maybe, and talking to people in their 40s, and him saying to them, you're only just started, you're 45. Imagine how much you can do between when you're your age and when you're my age, between the age of 45 and 65. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective shift, because that's 20 years of your life where, you know, in your head, you almost merge those two things at being the same point in time, and they're not really at all.
It's totally different, and you can do anything at any stage. You know, we've got a really warped idea that somehow, you know, you've got to have achieved so much by the, you know, sort of 20s to 30s. And it's not true at all. You have an entire lifetime. And in fact, you know, I'm about to turn 53. And in my 50s, you know, I have an entirely new career, a new training. You know, I'm a qualified psychotherapist. I'm working with the Dream Research Institute. Just created we're just doing a dreams podcast. I've got other projects. The kind of life that I've got now was the life I always wanted. And in some respects, in many respects, it's actually only possible now that I am the age I'm at.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, don't ever feel limited or feel trapped that, you know, you've got to have a relationship by this stage, or a degree by this stage, or a career or a home by this stage. You know, it's all of that stuff is fluid.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about Cowboy Builders?
You can.
So Cowboy Builders, 10 out of 10 TV show. Used to binge watch Cowboy Builders, I think. I think it was one of those programs that was on every day, largely. It was a program where you'd go in with Dominic Littlewood and fix people's dodgy extensions or kitchens or whatever someone had cowboyed. I guess first question is, did you enjoy it as a project, as a show?
I think that was probably my favourite show that I did. So I think we did like 8 years, maybe 10 years of that. And it was one of the hardest and definitely the least glamorous, because, you know, it was sort of regularly 16-hour days and traveling all over the country and literally being morning to night in a building site, because the homes would be, you know, uninhabitable.
Bit like the drilling outside.
A little bit like, I feel very at home and relaxed here because of that. So, you know, and we're sort of sitting on paint pots, eating our sandwiches from the local Spa. And, you know, so they...
Just to be clear, the Spa, the supermarket, rather than
not the Spa.
The pampered.
Yeah, it was the absolute
we
opposite
went
of that.
to the Spa during the filming day.
We never went to it. The only Spa we went to was the one that was on the corner.
Yeah.
You know, so it was hard work. And, you know, it was kind of a brand new show. And Dom and I guess sort of we didn't really know how it was going to pan out, but I think it was my favourite show. And the reason it was my favourite show is because I felt like for the first time, I can use what I'm doing to help someone else. You know, it was finally like the money that the production company had available and the resources that they had available meant that this family who had lost their life savings, everything that they'd worked their lives for, to get an extra bedroom in the attic of their house for their kids, and spent everything on that, and then left with a house without a roof, and, you know, in a situation that they would never be able to get out of, because
how would they?
Where do you get that money from? For me, having the resources to step in and go, we can actually sort this out, and we can sort this out for you for 2 weeks, made me feel like that, for me, that was the right use of my job.
Yeah. And I remember watching it and thinking how, firstly, some of them are horrific circumstances that people have found themselves in over no fault of their own. And you just think, how have you survived up to this point?
It was heartbreaking. There was many a time, I remember, that I would just be in the loo somewhere crying and not being able to film or do it because I was in someone's home in their life and seeing the distress and the impact it was having on them. And, the only kind of, I guess, consolation I had was the realization that we would actually be able to turn it around for them, which was great. But of course, it doesn't account for all the other people that, you know, we didn't get to work with. It's it was tough, but rewarding.
There's probably a thing with it as well of, you know, when your house is in turmoil, you know, you're living amongst, you know, chaos really in terms of having no roof, for example, whatever. It probably puts pressure on the relationships between them. So you're helping them in that sense too, I suppose. It
puts pressure on everything. It's fundamental. It's absolutely, it's in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, it's the base of the triangle is you need shelter and safety and security before you can even do anything else. And so if you take that away from somebody, and home is your shelter and your safety and your security, if you take that away, you know, life is very, very hard. So absolutely, the ripple effect in people's lives is huge.
I have a question that I have been wanting to know the answer to for about a decade, which is this. As part of that show, you'd go and get stuff for the houses that you'd blag for free. Did you really, though?
I really did.
Really?
I genuinely did. And
because I always thought, well, this is a nice format, but are they actually just paying them off camera?
Do you know? Absolutely not.
Really?
The first few that we did, and of course the show hadn't gone out, so people hadn't seen it. You know, some people we got lots of no's. No, we can't do it. We can't do it. And that, you know, it was really awkward, but we just had to keep on until we found somebody that said yes. Yeah. So that was all absolutely genuine. What did end up happening is that in the end, everybody started saying yes, which is actually a really beautiful thing. And it restored my faith in humanity because I was like, wow, the generosity. And these are small local companies.
What was their motivation for doing that?
Well,
was it because they wanted to get their face on telly?
I'd like to be altruistic about it. I think it's a multitude of things. I think actually most people are inherently good and kind. And when somebody is in need, people want to help, you know, if they can. And so actually I do believe that generally there's a desire to want to do something to help. And that is a primary motivator. And then for some people and for others, it might also be, well, and this will be good for me because I'll get publicity. But either way, they are the ones that are donating. It's their money. And these aren't necessarily big organizations. These are, you know, family run businesses. And I remember one company donated, it was like a 60 grand kitchen.
Really?
You know, 60 grand, that's a lot. We actually got to the point where I remember the producers saying, we need somebody to say no, you know, and not say yes, because people don't believe us, you know, like you, but it was absolutely true. Yeah. So, yeah, which is wonderful, isn't it? And I think we are like that, really, people. I think if somebody's struggling and in need, your instinct is to want to help in some way, if you can help.
I think that's true. I think most people like that. And the thing that I've learned, certainly in the last 2.5 years or longer, really, of doing a theatre show where you have, you know, 500 people every day, some of them in Scotland and some of them in Southampton and some of them in Exeter and some of them in Norwich and some of them in London and somewhere in Manchester and all over the country, is that everyone is fundamentally the same. They have the same base objectives in terms of, you know, they normally want good for their family more than they want good for themselves, it seems to be my experience. People's senses of humour are the same. And the other thing is, the interesting thing about living here versus the States or anywhere else really that I've experienced is on the sort of little island we find ourselves is that everyone has virtually the same sense of humour. If you take, you know, any degree of sort of snobbery out of it, and that, you know, works both ways. But everyone virtually has the same sense of humour. We have the same reference points. People largely care about themselves and people around them. And it's a really unifying way of seeing the world. And I've only got that, you know, the more I travel the country with the tour show and then, you know, go elsewhere, the more I like being here, because you think I can be in Scotland today and they will get the same. And despite everyone having a different accent every 30 miles, we all are exactly the same. You know, you could make a joke about something that, you know, that's something that's topical and everyone gets it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's really, really lovely, actually.
Well, yeah, you're right. And you're talking about connection, I guess, aren't you? You know, you're talking about like, what are the roots of our humanity, you know, and where do we connect and how do we connect with each other? And I think actually that's also a part of when things work for people, is when you can connect. So, you know, that's if the audience can connect with you or relate to you in some way, then you know, you're immediately sort of part of the family.
Yeah, and it's also, it's you know, you have people are clustered in, you know, their environments, I suppose. So I remember doing a show in Winchester, and everyone was like a barrister or a property developer or something like that. And then you go and I'll do a show in somewhere that's less affluent, and everyone will have another job that's similar, and most people are somewhere in between. But regardless of if you're a barrister or you're someone that you know, works part-time, you know, at a supermarket or whatever, you are the same fundamentally. You're the same. You have the same objectives and the same thing, and everything else is almost irrelevant, really. And certainly in sort of a sense of unity and connection, it really is something that I've taken away from doing the show. You know, my show's very much not me going, look at something I've learned. It's very much about the audience. And so, yeah, when you were talking about, you know, everyone wants to help someone or everyone would help someone in need, I do think that is largely true.
Yeah, it is largely true. And of course, you know, we don't mean absolutely everybody, because, you know we got the predators out there too, who are the ones that would do the absolute opposite and take everything they can off someone. But I think in terms of the balance, you know, the balance towards people who genuinely, you know, will do care and in a crisis would want to be there for others. There are more of those.
Yeah,
you know.
But also it touches on, you know, the producer wanting someone to say no. There is that a story is built, no matter what the story is always built on conflict in some way, and conflict and resolution. And, you know, if you read anything on PR, it's always, where's the conflict in the story? Otherwise, no one's going to care. And so you don't talk about the stuff where it's just peaceful and, you know.
No, because it doesn't capture the attention, does it? You know, it's, absolutely. It's, and in a way, I guess, so Joseph Campbell's work, you know, which is all about the hero's journey, you can apply it really to sort of pretty much everything. But that's all about, there's got to be a challenge. There's got to be a challenge. You've got to face the demons and monsters somewhere. You've got to lose everything and be at rock bottom, you know, to go through that then transformation, then to sort of get the discovery and bring it back and share it with the community.
So to talk about the hero's journey, because that is actually a really interesting talking point, because you can use it in anything, you know, whether it be copywriting or writing a story.
It's the formation of every film story.
Yeah. I mean, it's
the formation of human life. That's why.
It comes from like Greek literature, I think, originally. But the idea is that if you're Simba in The Lion King, you travel from the Pride Lands to wherever it is with Timon and Pumbaa, and then back to the Pride Lands. That's the physical journey. But in that, he has an emotional journey of growing and going from a naive, which I suppose is kind of what we've been talking about, just in general. He travels from like a naive boy prince who runs off and has that time in turmoil, but in that time in turmoil he grows, and then he comes back and wins the day effectively. And so it's the emotional journey that makes things interesting. And it's kind of what I suppose, to round everything off quite nicely, what has happened from, you know, your first days in show business to now finding yourself as a psychotherapist and living the life that you would like to live.
That's exactly it. And it's the human journey, and it's all of ours. You know, our stories might be different, but, you know, the challenges, the tragedies, the wins, you know, are common to us all, just in different shapes and forms.
What a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for coming, Melinda. I have had a wonderful afternoon. I hope you have as well.
I've had a delightful afternoon. Thank you so much. And to the gorgeous
she's been largely
Bella.
asleep, talking about the hierarchy of needs, needing a roof over your head. Sighs like she has to pay a mortgage and doesn't have to do anything in her life except sleep and eat.
I
And one other
aspire
thing.
to be like that.
Me too.
That's when I know I've really made it.
So that was Melinda Messenger, and I thought a really insightful conversation. I actually really had a wonderful time with Melinda. We actually spoke a load before we were recording and a load after we were recording too. And it's really, I find it really interesting because she's been on this journey where she was in the public eye introvertedly, and then has over the last 5 years become a psychotherapist and trained. So she can provide a lot of insight into how people's brains work, and it was really interesting. I had a really, really lovely conversation, and I think there's a lot of value in there in sort of coping mechanisms and also just good advice for breaking into anything that is sort of public, a sort of public facing career. So I hope you enjoyed it too, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.